Dr. Cambridge, at the beginning of the conversation, I said we are here at your feet as students to learn, and I hate to interrupt you because I mean this is such rich information, but I am curious about a few things. One, what surprised you as you did this research? Was there anything that surprised you that you discovered about our music history that really surprised you? That's one. And two, did you begin writing this book with a sense of urgency that this has to be chronicled, or did this urgency came upon you as you wrote?
I didn't start this book with a sense of urgency specifically. I was conscious of the fact that Guyana needed an accessible history of its 20th century life as a way for contextualizing contemporary challenges in Guyanese society. One, I was aware that reflecting on Guyanese life over the 20th century was a very sensitive, to use a Guyanese term, a very touchous thing. I was aware that many politicians were drawing upon Guyanese history and twisting it for their own ends. So I recognized that there was a need to tell this story, but the question was, how do you tell this story in a way that is accessible and inclusive? And my theoretical work is in a field called entertainment education. How do you use entertainment vehicles as platforms for promoting and supporting positive social change? And I found that if one told the story of Guyanese life in the 20th century through the lens of music, it would be a comfortable and accessible way for us to explore our common history, learn lessons from that, and prepare ourselves for the future. That the urgency was, how do I get this story into the public domain so we could see that there have been patterns in our life that we've been repeating these patterns across these periods of matured colonialism, the preparation for independence, the early post-independence era, and the era from 1992 that was controlled by the PPP. There are patterns in there that we keep repeating, and I thought that the musical story would allow us to see these patterns and recognize that we have exhausted certain behaviors, or we should have exhausted certain behaviors, and now in this new dispensation really carve new directions for the future. Music provides us with that kind of lens. You know, if you ask if there was something that that surprised me, I wouldn't say surprised, because I was pretty intimately involved with a lot of this stuff as an officer in the Guyana National Service. I felt the pride of my colleagues when they looked at the repertoire of music created by the Guyana National Service pioneer and staff members, like, I want to build. I was aware of this, but what really was fascinating was to look at to experience the evidence, and when one looks at something like Nesbitt Changour's Guyana Lament, which really speaks to us of those dark times in the 60s of the great, the racial violence and the blood, and to recognize that song played at least once an hour, 24 hours a day on Radio Demerara and GBS during that those dark times, did contribute to a feeling that many of us have today. How can we live together and create a big society? So I've seen Guyanese music respond to circumstances and create content and melodies that are lasting. So the other thing that I found was the influence Guyanese musicians have had around the world. We don't hear a lot about it, but Guyanese musicians across the 20th century have contributed to the musical life of many countries. Rudolph Dunbar, his contribution to European music, and particularly the clarinet in England and in France, his role as a conductor. You take, in the more contemporary times, you take a man like Eddie Grant. What Eddie Grant has done with popular music globally is nothing to be to sneer about. It's really a big thing. You take the contribution of Dave Martin, Victor Shim, and these guys in Canada in terms of creating a space for the immigrant to celebrate. And even leaping forward, you take an organization like our alumni organization, the New York chapters. You've got this party coming up in a couple of weeks, and the theme is flunks. This is, you're drawing upon the masquerade heritage. So I don't think we really recognize the influence that Guyanese musicians have had around the world. Take a man like Ronnie Sweet Lips Hart from Hope Town, Berbice. He goes to England and plays a major role in the development of contemporary British pop music. Australia, you look around the world. Derek Jeffrey, he's currently living in Thailand. Derek Jeffrey introduces steel band in Thailand. Take the guy who has the Roy Geddes. Roy Geddes built the first set of steel bands in Tanzania. Calvin White built steel band in Cuba. So the scope, the audacity of Guyanese musicians. You imagine the Chronicle Atlantic Symphony Orchestra is traveling to Moscow and is going to include in its repertoire Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture. This is like taking Russian composition back to Russia with a new instrumentation, and they do it with such confidence and competence that they attract critical report. I was speaking earlier this week to Dr. Jadopat, who lives here in New York. And he was a student at Moscow State University when the Chronicle Atlantic Symphony toured and performed. And he still, almost 30 years later, speaks about the goosebumps and the great pride he had as a Guyanese student to hear this group come there. So these are the things that I see. The pattern behavior of the state's involvement in sponsoring and funding, and eventually the state, he who pays the piper can call the tune. So that has always been a dynamic in Guyanese life, and I think we are at a new moment now where there could be a mixture of many players in defining and determining Guyanese musical life.
Before you run off, Dr. Cmbridge, is there any artist, any musician you didn't get to interview you wish you had?
I wish I could have interviewed Al Seals, but I was able to speak with his son, the distinguished Guyanese musician Ray Seals. Vestalo, I would love to have spoken with Vestalo. I would have loved to have had a word with Peter Moses de Weaver. I'd love to have spoken with Kosu, Mortimer Kosu. I would love to have had a word with Ruby McGregor, the great woman from New Amsterdam. But I was fortunate to speak with relatives or people who work very closely with some of those folks. My research method was one that drew upon a number of data collecting strategies, including in-depth interviews with political leaders, with performers, people who are administrators, and my own immersion in the society, having worked in the Guyana National Service and with the Guyana Broadcasting Corporation. Those experiences kind of, set me on a path of asking questions. There are a lot of people I need to thank. There are tons of people I need to thank, from my Christchurch, from the Woodbine, the Woodside Choir, to people like Camo Williams, Ivor Lynch here, Jocelyn Small, the late Ayub Hamid, the people at the University of Leipzig, the British Library, the U.S. Library of Congress, Hugh Sam, I will run afoul if I attempted to list all the names. But in the book, I have an extended chapter that speaks to the methods I used for this book, and it identifies a range of people, from my cousins, my spouse. The book is dedicated to my spouse. She is a musician, a very good musician. She was the winner of the Philip Pilgrim Harp for musical achievement in Guyana. So there are lots of people I want to thank, and I wish I could have interviewed. There was a man, what was his name now? His name slips me, but this is a old-time pre-Calypsonian. He was supposedly, according to Pogigi Punkas, he was supposedly a patient at the leprosy asylum during the early 20th century. And he would escape every season and come to town and sing his popular songs. He was criticized for the songs. They said he took the mickey out of people. I would love to have interviewed Bill Rogers, but fortunately his son is alive, and his son had provided me with access to a lot of Bill Rogers's original writings and publication.
And quickly, Dr. Cmbridge, just two questions in the chat room. Tess asks, how can this knowledge help us bridge social gaps?
Commonality. This knowledge would show that as a people, we have used the platform of music to speak to common aspirations, to common frustrations, to common hopes. So if we listen to the music, we could find that we are speaking about common themes. Our music, looking at our music, shows that we have a common history of innovation. If we just look at the drums in Guyana, there's a pattern of innovation, of making our own drums. For example, among our Indian ancestors, our Indian community, the mango tree trunk is the preferred trunk for making the dolak. The X-ray film has become a preferred membrane. So in all of the musical communities in Guyana, we see this pattern of innovation, common aspirations, common themes. Now what we are now seeing is through the work of innovative people like Derry Atkins and teacher Raghu and some of the folks at the National School of Music, is this ongoing tradition of finding commonality and fusion. In the 60s, the Theatre Guild Quintet with Roy Geddes, Camo Williams, what's his name, Taiti Joseph, and Marcelal on sitar. These guys started to do some very interesting things, drawing upon the melodies and tones and instrumentation of our traditional groups. We saw Terry Nelson with experimenting with the Afro indie beat. Segar is telling us that there is among our Amerindian communities Banshikali. And in recent times, he identified Kalimari, which is a fusion between Calypso and Mari Mari. So an interesting dynamic is taking place now in our society, where music is really showing the path for a sustainable set of interactions. As a matter of fact, if you take that long view, you can see music has always been the platform that creates the opportunity for the bridging. And the wonderful thing is that it is spontaneous. It needs to be supported. So I think that is the phenomenon that is happening now that may provide an answer to that question about how music could help us to bridge.
And the last question Gail T asked, I said, I heard of your book. How long did you take to write it?
As I mentioned, I started the moment, the spark was in 2000, in August 2000. I had about 6-8 years of field research doing that. I had 2 years of ill health. So altogether between conceptualization and publication, it was almost 15 years.
Oh my gosh. How does it feel, Dr. Cmbridge, to have finally completed this book?
You know, you are satisfied that you have made a contribution, but you are conscious of the fact that as a public intellectual, this is just the beginning of a work. It is a platform upon which other scholars can build upon. So I feel good that I've made my contribution. I recognize that it's finite. It has not interrogated the very deeply the last 15 years, because it was a 20th century work, but I was able to capture the tensions associated with musical life when the PPP replaced the PNC. The internal story of the PPP and how they dealt with the musical legacy of the PPP is an entirely different story. It's a new story, and I think that story needs to be told in depth. I was fortunate that I interviewed most of the PPP ministers responsible for culture, including Janet Jagan as a former president, but all of those from the 1992 Minister of Culture, the civic guy, the Reverend, his name slips me at the moment, right through to Frank Anthony. I've had access to public documents, and so I think that's a period that really needs to be written about solidly, the PPP era and musical life in Guyana. I alluded to it, I've referred to it, but I think it needs to be studied really deeply.
Thank you, Dr. Cmbridge. Thank you so much for introducing us to this book and this vast oasis of historic information. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Selwyn, and happy Christmas, everybody. And as the Masquerade people says, this is the time when we should flunks.
Are you going to be at the party, Dr. Cmbridge?
No, unfortunately, I'm going to do eye surgery tomorrow, so I'm not going to be.
Well, much blessings, Dr. Cmbridge.
Thank you so much, and God bless you.
God bless you. Good night.
Good night. Bye-bye.